today's show and look forward to introducing Shona Elliott, who is going to be my special guest on today's show. The topic for today is healthcare leadership, and we are going to take a deep dive into the missing pieces and the gap in the knowledge of healthcare leadership today, and go into a lot of details about what we can do to fix that with healthcare leadership, and kind of get all into that good stuff. So before we get started, if you are here, please go ahead and click the like button and respond in the comments. Let us know where you are chiming in from. And we would love to have you participate in the discussion. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce Shona to you. Shona, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Noelle. It's an honor to be here. And I can give a bit of a background if that would be helpful, Noelle. I've got
Absolutely.
15 to 20 years of healthcare leadership experience at the senior level, both in Canada and the United States. And I stepped down from my senior leadership role when I was a CEO of a technology and supply chain organization for hospitals in Canada when my daughter turned 1. And so I had the blessing to be home with her for a few years. And she started preschool last year, and I had the opportunity to write a book and start up a little bit of an entrepreneurial business this year. And I'm now supporting other senior leaders connect with their employees, understand the value of that connection, and really understand employee culture and build trust so that they can achieve their organizational goals.
Awesome. So before we get into talking, a little bit about your journey when we spoke about the healthcare leadership and the curriculum that you worked on, I want to talk more about the transformational leadership piece and what was your passion to really take a look at leadership and the senior leadership team and culture around that? Because that's an area that I don't think we often focus on, is that senior leadership level.
For sure. And I was pretty fortunate in my career. I became a senior leader when I was fairly young as a leader and fairly young overall. So as I was kind of getting my legs underneath me as a senior leader, I kind of realized I was at the table usually the least experienced, and always with a portfolio that I didn't have direct experience in. So my undergrad's a biochemistry degree, and I worked in a clinical laboratory for a few years. And in my first senior leadership role, I was responsible for a bunch of things that weren't lab based. So I had a lot of clinical operational programs reporting to me, human resources, risk management, infection control, all sorts of stuff that, although I knew something about, but I wasn't deep in that space. So I had to kind of figure out how I was going to be the best senior leader I could be without having kind of the formal qualifications. Like, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a physician, not a CFO. And so for me, what worked was doing what I wanted to do as a leader, which is be in support to employees and make their lives as best as possible, their working conditions as best as possible, so they can provide the best care to patients. And so to be that senior leader, I kind of just really relied on that and really started to connect with employees as best as I could and rely on them for their opinions, their perspectives, their feedback. That way I was learning as I went along, and most importantly, asking them for their perspective as to how we could be making things better for them. And so as I did that, and I speak about this often, a practice that's worked really well for me in my career has been what I call walking in the shoes of others, or in shoes of the employee. And I would routinely just take shifts, every month, every few months, and work a full shift in various departments so I could feel what it felt like to be working alongside of them and understand their challenges, understand the impact of the decisions we made as senior leaders, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, and really just kind of get a feel for what it was like to be working in our organization. And through those practices, I was really fascinated as to what I learned as a senior leader. So that carried me forward. And the more I kind of grew in my role and I saw what other senior leaders did and did not do, really became fascinated with what was a disconnect to me, and something I call management mythology. So leaders in healthcare typically sit in rooms, boardrooms, meeting rooms all day, every day. And we kind of repeat the same stories. We hear someone's perspective about an issue and then we repeat it. And we don't really ever fact check that against the reality that the front lines are experiencing. And so I really understood quickly that it was really incumbent as senior leaders to do their own research and really see for themselves what's happening at the front line. And then that way, when you hear those stories, you can kind of validate that. And in my experience with senior leaders, the reports you get from your directors or your VPs, sometimes it's sanitized and it's polished and isn't accurately reflecting the tangible realities that's occurring at the front line. And so we are making decisions, I feel, in less of an informed way that we should be. And so for me, that connection piece as a senior leader is even more critical. You know, layer on top of that, the importance for visibility for senior leaders. That's just another area that employees crave, and they want to know that the senior leaders care about the work that they're doing. And so when you're visible and actively engaged, I think you see a whole different outcome and a whole different culture as a result of that. So I've kind of learned that experientially. And as I wrote my book, I really did deep research with respect to how that shows up in the literature. And then even more recently, having built a graduate level course curriculum for University in Canada on healthcare leadership, I really can see it show up, the value in doing that. So it's been wonderful to kind of be on the path I've been on experience-wise, and then be able to do research in a couple of different facets to kind of enhance kind of what I felt was true to begin with.
And I love that. And you bring up such a great point because you're a natural leader. It takes a lot of leaders that really have to go through the training and the thought process and a different mindset to get to where you naturally had that ability to sort of seek out this information, understand it firsthand, and then have that ability to take that information and lead the group. It's very similar to the leadership program that I just started implementing that's going to go live in January. And I love hearing you talk because it actually makes me feel like there's such a need for it, right? Leaders are often put into positions that they're not ready for, but that doesn't mean they can't succeed in it. They just are not given the certain tools, the tactics, the way to communicate in order to get there. And I love the comment that you had made when you took the time to go to other units and spend time. I call those in my world field trips. When
love it.
Each new job that I started, my staff would laugh because I was like, all right, I'll see you guys later. I'm going on a field trip. And they're like, what? Where are you going? Because it's always pick up the phone. Do you know so-and-so? Pick up the phone, page them, text them. And I said, where do they live in this hospital? Yeah. And I made it a point to go there because it's very different when you meet the people that you're trying to interact with than to just have that phone call. So so I love that you said that because it is so much more impacting to develop and build that relationship, right?
For sure. And I love the field trip example. It reminds me of a time where I was responsible for infection prevention and control, and the medical director that I partnered with, he was known to be very crunchy, very opinionated, and kind of like the squeaky wheel. And like no one really wanted to work with him, but so I got tapped on the shoulder to do that. And there was this issue that he was really focused on. We call it the paper towel keeper. And so our corporate services team, which also reported to me at the time, made a decision without engaging in feedback, which is kind of the lesson learned here, to switch paper towels. There was a cheaper paper towel. They wanted to save costs. So what is a paper towel? Like, whatever, it's a paper towel. So it's cheaper. They put it in. Wow. and the chaos that occurred after that change. And so the infection control medical director was also a surgeon. And so in the OR, as they're scrubbing and they're trying to dry or whatever, like the paper towels, they grabbed it, would break apart and dissolve. And like they couldn't ever get a good grip. Yeah. And it was just absolute chaos. And so he would be bringing this up at board meetings and at meetings, and he would just go on and on and on. And so, I had to investigate it. It is an infection prevention control concern if you can't properly dry your hands. In addition, you're wasting a lot more paper towels if you're just not able to grab. I mean, it's just a whole host of issues that I had to dive into. Right. And so anyway, so we made the change, and, he was correct. And though he didn't believe, we made the change. So I said, you're coming with me now. We were in the middle of a meeting. I said, we're going on a field trip. So we went on a field trip through different departments of the hospital. And I made him look into the paper towel holders, test them out, and give him his stamp of approval. So the field trip idea, that concept, is incredible because you have to see it sometimes for yourself, like just sitting in a room, talking about it's one thing, but until you can actually travel, meet people, talk to them about their experience, see the environment, you don't really have a clear picture as to what's going on. And so that field trip was incredible. I actually had some pictures taken too along the way, so we could put that in our newsletter and use it for positive promotion. But he was also able to speak to staff, as was I, to get their feedback on the change that we made. So there was lots of lessons learned in regards to engaging in feedback before decisions are made just on cost alone, and to get the feedback from the employees and the use of that product. And I mean, that story, I'm sure you've got many examples where you've heard the same. And it is really that lesson learned. And one of those missing pieces of leadership is before decisions are made, it's getting the feedback of those impacted by it. And I know leaders feel that takes time, and it does, but doing that proactive work on the front end saves you so much more time on the back end. So in this example, had our corporate services team trialed the paper towel with user feedback prior to making that decision, they would never have moved forward with that. And we would have avoided the whole paper towel caper in the first place, which created a lot of distrust. And, the scuttlebutt within the units was, well, who thought of this idea? Don't they know? And all of that distress that incurs as a result of not engaging employees on the front end. So to me, that's a huge missing piece in leadership. And it's a lesson I've learned many times over and over again. But the importance of taking the time, which we feel as leaders we don't have, to engage employees in the feedback of decisions that impact them.
Love it. And part of that too, you're actually making your job easier.
Absolutely.
If you go right to the source of where it's coming from, get the feedback, all of that's happened before won't happen. That whole fiasco with the paper towels would not have happened if you went right to, and it's funny because it reminds me of, because my whole background has been pediatric critical care. And there was this fiasco over pacifiers, and supply chain just happened to use Switch. This was before value analysis really got to be, a very large and, pronounced thing in organizations. And they just switched the pacifier. Well, let me tell you what that did and the ripple effect that had.
I can only imagine.
And it's funny. And the staff, it's the first question that they ask. Why didn't we know about this change?
Yeah.
Because if there's an option or not, it's important to just let them know, it's a chain reaction event, whether you can help it or not, it's important to just let them know. So I will forever remember that paper towel story.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting because even as I evolved as a leader and did lots of leadership development and had my management team in leadership development, this stage of my career, I'm thinking, I know a lot about leadership. I'm very employee-centric, people-centric, culture, and all of that. And I share a story in my book where my occupational health and safety director came up to me one day and said, these Crocs we have in the workplace, they have to go, they're unsafe. So this was back in the day when the predominant model of Crocs were the ones with all the holes in it. They're very unsturdy. So I said, oh yeah, for sure. Those Crocs are definitely unsafe. Needles can go through the holes. They don't provide adequate protection. Yeah, go ahead. And I support that. well, to me, it was an easy decision. It's an unsafe shoe, whatever. And so she proceeded to issue a memo banning Crocs from the workplace. So, well, I didn't really check in with her in terms of like how she was going to mobilize the decision and all that. So, well, the feedback I got back from the leaders in the organization, and it was a unionized hospital at the time, and some very trusted union leaders I have high respect for, were like, come into my office, they're like, who would do this? Don't you know there's a hospital model of Crocs that is safe? And like, why wouldn't you create a safe footwear policy? I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, of course. And so, all throughout the organization, people are like now upset and untrusting because we didn't talk to the people in advance. Hey, this model Croc is unsafe, has lots of holes in it. And let's talk about a safe footwear policy instead of just banning Crocs. And so we had to do all of the rework. We brought the actual model of hospital-based Croc into our occupational health and safety team meeting. We're like measuring the dorsal and the heel height. It was just like this whole thing. And it could have been avoided with the simple practice of, okay, yes, I get Crocs are unsafe, the model with all the holes in it, but let's talk to employees about what is safe and how do they feel about that. And easily have done that at a occupational health and safety committee meeting, which has employees on it. And so even yet when I knew, and my leader who was the director knew that we should be engaging employees, you sometimes don't think about that in real time because you think it's like a no-brainer decision. That is a no-brainer decision. I don't want holes in shoes in the workplace. Like that's no brainer, but you don't think of the implications of the process to implement. So even after having done lots of work on leadership, I still had missteps and we did debrief. I mean, we fixed it and we're able to repair trust and all of that. And it was a significant lesson learned that things that we take for granted as leaders, as no-brainer decisions, we still have to take the time to do the check-in with the employees because they will see things and know things that we don't know as leaders. So it's really critical to do that.
And sometimes we need those sort of hiccups to even learn from, right? I mean, that's how leaders throughout the process get stronger and smarter in their decision-making as well. That seems like a lesson learned, like an opportunity that you recognize for yourself. You'll never forget that moment.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. And we've at least I could speak for myself. I've had those. I've tripped and felled and ate dirt a few times, but the key to leadership is the humility in that, right? You have to be humble. I have called myself out more times than probably I would have liked to my staff because we're all human. And there are certain situations that come up that is new to all of us. Again, if you look at, now with the novel, coronavirus, when, back months ago when I was overseeing 5 departments and had to turn them pediatrics into an adult COVID unit, I sat there and I was like, so we're obviously all in this together. So let's all talk about this.
Absolutely.
Because you just can't make those decisions, but it's so important to even call yourself out on them too.
It is for sure. And humility is important. So when those issues happen, I'm all about acknowledging where, we had a misstep and, you can laugh about it a bit. I think as a senior leader, the piece though was helping my director through that. So she wasn't as easygoing about the misstep as I was. To me, yes, of course, like we didn't think of that and we should have thought of that and we should ask our employees about it going forward and make that change. And my director didn't have as easy of a time with acknowledging that and doing that work. So as a senior leader, it was really working with her and coaching her and helping her understand the need to acknowledge where we needed to approach things differently. And I think that's part of the senior leadership role is, although we are maybe in a place of leadership different than our directors, that we have to help them with that and help them understand why humility is important. It's not always right or wrong. There's always gray. And some leaders have a harder time with the gray than others. And to me, I think that's one of the coaching challenges I continue to face in my leadership career is helping people see that it's not always black and white. Most of leadership lives in the gray, and you have to be comfortable with that and flexible, and then have a sense of humility that sometimes you're going to be right? Sometimes you're wrong. And sometimes you make decisions as best as you can with the information on hand. And upon hindsight, it would look, it's going to look different because you know more when you look back. So coaching leaders to understand that and be comfortable with that is, I think, a significant role a senior leader has to play.
Absolutely. And it's getting them to the position where it is okay. Be comfortable with it.
Giving them permission, so to speak. Yes.
Exactly. Take off that armor.
Yes.
Yep. Take off that armor. Show us the human side, and it's okay. I want to pause and take a moment just to look over at the comments. And I see Brett Briner has joined in from Salina, Texas. He's with Texas Children's. So thanks, Brett, for being here. And my comments are slow as a sloth right now. So I don't know what I'm seeing on my end. But yeah, as they come in, we'll just continue to look over at the group. And please chime in, to those that are watching. What has been your experience with senior leadership or as a senior leader, and what would you like to see change? What's missing in your area that we could touch upon in this conversation? And I'd like to kind of turn that over to
as a leader. And we don't get to see that a lot when we're teaching leadership development. There's a lot of focus in on more of the kind of foundational skills around budgeting, around basic communication, scheduling, Lean Six Sigma, quality improvement, some of those things, all important. But if you don't start on the basis foundation of understanding why you want to be a leader, what is your purpose of being a leader, and then what you know about yourself in terms of what triggers you emotionally, what kind of stress you can handle, and then how do you approach your view of life? So are you one that's half, cup half full or half empty? Like, what do you see and what are you grateful for? So it's trying to build in those elements into the foundation of leadership, because that is what's going to carry you. If you know your why and you're able to look at things through a lens of gratitude, and you're able to understand how to navigate your emotions and then the emotions of others, then the rest of the leadership stuff will fall into place. You can navigate anything if you have that kind of foundation in place. So I was able to build that in. And I really did my best to try to build in case studies to show them the reality of what it's like to lead. So there's no leadership course I know of that really speaks to, you can be at home at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., have a day full of meetings, and then you get a call that there's a, sentinel event or a critical incident on your unit, and your day is hijacked. And then you have to handle disclosure to patients. You have to handle the actual investigation. You have to handle the employee who was involved in that, or employees. Then you have to handle the employees who are working with that employee. And you have to juggle all of that as a leader. And you have a day full of meetings, you have a budget due, a report due, whatever it is, and how you navigate that stress, and then how you still show up and be supportive in a non-judging way of the employees that were involved in the incident and the employees who work with the employees involved in the incident, while you're still trying to manage disclosure to family, correct any immediate issues, line up a deep dive into what actually happened from a root cause perspective, while everything else is going on. So a lot of novice leaders or new leaders don't even know that that's what leadership is about, and aren't taught that, don't have a lot of support to do that, and don't have the experience to do that. And so I tried to build in those case studies to kind of really have them rely on that base foundation of why you're a leader, how you will show up regardless of the circumstances, rooted in the presence of yourself and understanding where not to get triggered, and to be present and be supportive and empathetic along the way, and the rest will sort itself out. So that's one case study in one module, is part of an overall course, so it was interesting to paint that picture for them. And again, it's not a full curriculum. And the intention really is to try to give them some insight that it is not kind of like you show up and, everything is the same 9 to 5. It just isn't. And every day will be different. And every day will have its competing priorities and very unexpected circumstances that you won't be trained to deal with. And so when you don't know how to deal with it, how do you live in those circumstances? And what are your priorities? Is the priorities, your employees and leading with a sense of empathy and support, or what is it? So trying to figure out all that along the way.
And I think that's fantastic, because we're at that point with, retention is bad enough with nurses on the front line, but now it's just as bad with nursing leaders.
Oh, yeah.
Over the last 6 months, I've seen more nursing leaders, including myself, step back from their positions for so many reasons that we have not put ourselves first to be able to take care of all of those things. And, you're talking about leaders with experience. Now, can you imagine these new leaders, these emerging leaders coming into this? It would be short-lived. And what I love about it is it's kind of like really exciting because it's very similar, to my leadership program that I'm developing too, or that I did develop, that'll start, because I talk about with leaders now, it's to really find themselves and bring their core self back. And I talk about the 4 key dimensions that leaders need to have in order to retain staff. Mm-hmm. And emotional intelligence is one of them. So we talk about emotional intelligence, individualism, influence, and consistency. And the individualism is take yourself away from your title, separate person from persons and talk to that staff as an individual. Mm-hmm. And that's where you're going to get more information out of a staff nurse of what they need for themselves, and not just together as a team, because everyone's growing differently, and the power of influence. Do you love yourself? Why do people love you?
Right.
And that's one of the things that, that we discussed too, like what's so great about you? That's hard for people to answer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is.
It's part of that commitment. And, and with emotional intelligence, it's, how you say what you say. And if you realize that you're not getting the outcome and the answer that you need from that situation, you need to take a step back and say, what is it about me that's not fixing the situation or that's causing the situation to be worse? So I'm excited for your course to happen. I think it's going to be awesome. And it's definitely something that new leaders are going to need, especially during this time, because no one's teaching them.
Oh, no.
The basic needs of self-care. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy. Like, you need to understand you, because if you get into that Sentinel event, how are you going to react to that? Because if you get in a tizzy, right, and you're like, oh, fall apart, what are you going to do? You create that environment.
For sure. And as you get stressed, you kind of resort to the primal state of self and leadership. And so that is judge, blame, and, try to figure out who is at fault. And that never serves an organization well. And so that's just what happens when we're in that primal state. We have those primal emotions and we react and we say things that can not move the culture forward, but set the culture back. And all leaders and emerging leaders really need to kind of understand the impact of how they show up every minute and in every interaction. And that's something I'm working with other clients with, is that leaders, including senior leaders, are watched every minute of the day in verbal and written communications. And so that you always have to pause and think as to how your communication in any way or mode that you're communicating will be perceived and received, and understanding that you have a conscious choice in how you show up every minute to either move the culture forward or set it back. Those are your choices. And so with senior leaders I'm working with right now to try to help paint that picture for them as they are having some struggles with how they do communicate, especially in times of stress, is that if you're bringing me on board to support, every time you send a written email communication or have a conversation where you're saying, well, it's this way, or I'm putting the hammer down, or, like whatever those kind of hierarchical command and control type phrases are, like, you're throwing money out the window. Like, don't hire me, because why bother if you're going to continue to kind of act out of emotion, act out of fear, versus pausing. Those emotions are all normal. We all have them. So recognizing you're having them, it's okay you're having them, and then choose the next conscious thought as to not communicating that fear through your, written communication or how you show up verbally. So that takes time and coaching, and it's a journey for all of us. We've all had missteps along the way, and it's how we acknowledge that, how we reflect on it, and how we choose to show up differently tomorrow.
What are some steps do you think on how we can turn things around with leadership when they're in those moments?
Yeah. So if you're a senior leader and you're recognizing, as a senior leader, first you have to model the way. So, that's the old Kouzes Posner stuff about model the way. I mean, it's kind of leadership 101. And, it kind of speaks to that earlier example, is that we are watched all the time. So leaders and employees get their cues as to what is okay in terms of behavior by us as senior leaders. So as a senior leader, we have to understand that. So we have to model the way and model the culture that we expect from our leaders. Now, I will pause to say, for senior leaders, it really does in hospitals depend on the board. So, I won't spend a lot of time on that today, but I've done a lot of work over the years on governance. And unfortunately, most of the toxic organizations I've had to help support to become top 100 employers, it all started with the board, and it's really governance and what they're allowing. And that is a whole kind of hour-long conversation on its own to deal with. So I'll acknowledge the board's role in setting the expectations and culture for senior leaders, and then now I'll park it. But I did want to acknowledge it because it does start there. So assuming we have a great board, good governance, and good expectations right from the very top, then senior leaders do need to model the way. And if they're modeling the way and then they themselves are conscious of their own influence and impact, they can then be coaching their leaders. And so building in those practices with your own leadership team as to kind of that self-care. So self-care is another missing piece beyond just, that reflection. It is that balance. How are you sleeping? What's your physical activity, which obviously is challenged in COVID? Same with your eating practices and mindfulness and meditation. And so as a senior leader, it's incumbent of us to pay attention to that and be purposeful in asking our leaders if we want them to be able to be retained in the long term. We can't avoid that topic. And I know it's not it's not something that's often taught in terms of senior leaders being purposeful in asking our leaders those questions, and we need to. And then we have to coach them and help balance. So we have to give them permission to say, hey, you have 20 priorities on your plate. Let's chat about when you drop some of the things and how you make those decisions and what is the priority to focus on no matter what. And we don't give a lot of guidance routinely around that. And it's really critical. Frontline managers are the ones that are really sandwiched between the demands of the front line and then the expectations from senior leadership. And they're the ones that wear it all the time. And I was really purposeful early in my career when I did leadership development for one of my organizations, is that we had limited dollars, and I made the risky decision to just really focus in on middle managers. Our directors and VPs had a lot of opportunities for leadership that our managers did not. So we were purposeful in dedicating specific leadership coaching and development for that frontline manager group. And it was incredible. A, the investment, but B, what they did when they were able to focus in on themselves and understand that they could ask for a reprioritization of the 20 balls that they had in the air. And it was okay to do that. And they didn't have to carry all 20 balls every day, all day, and that there was a dialogue. And until you can have that conversation and provide that permission that you don't have to carry everything and we can discuss and talk about what's most important, then they feel that they don't have to carry the weight of everything they perceive to be important on their shoulders. And so senior leaders really need to begin to allow that space for those conversations and give them the time to have that dialogue around prioritization. And I hear often in healthcare organizations today that the senior leaders aren't visible. They're not giving the time to their leadership group. And if you get time, it's like 30 minutes once a month, and it's rushed and it's late and it's not clear. And so then how do you expect managers to stick around in that environment? They don't have clear direction. They don't know what they can say no to. They don't know what the priorities are. They don't know how to manage the stress. They don't have the tools to really do self-reflection. And so they get frustrated, or they lead from a place of their primal instincts. No one's coaching them otherwise. And then they get frustrated and they leave. And so those are the kind of those main steps I feel it's incumbent on senior leaders to be able to create that environment for leaders to show up to do their best work.
Right. And another thing I was thinking too is how do we find ways to close that gap between the senior leaders and managers? Because there has to be a buy-in at some point with senior leaders to take that pause and take that step back and say, what we're doing now is not working. we need to fix this. That's the piece that they may hear, but there's no follow through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like the most damaging thing a senior leader can do is have the conversation and do nothing with it. So actions always speak louder than words. And I see that often too, where, those words are said in meetings and people are excited to voice an opinion, excited that they're asked, and then they don't know if anything's happened. And maybe sometimes things are happening, but it's not communicated. And so either or, it isn't working. And so senior leaders need to understand, and that is their own leadership journey, is what are they paying attention to and what do they feel that they have to pay attention to, and having that penny drop for them. And then be in conversation and co-create the action plan. And so, it's rare I'll create an action plan on my own. It's always co-created and stakeholder responsibility assigned collectively, timelines determined collectively, and negotiated collectively. Great. So it's not an arbitrary decision on my end. And I hear stories all the time where performance management is done through, it's, online now. And so managers will get like a goal set that's kind of half completed from the VP or director, whomever they're reporting to. And then they add input and HR, sends it back to them. And there's never a discussion between the leaders. Right. I'm like, holy smokes, like that is a missed opportunity, and you'll never hit the mark when it's done like that. So unfortunately, although there's such great efficiency with e-tools and they're great, it's really though become an issue where the conversation has moved to the wayside. And e-tools are great. And if you don't have that dialogue and you're co-creating something together, you will never achieve all that you could otherwise. So I think that is a significant missing piece today, is that simple dialogue between senior leader or leader to leader, depending on the structure of the hospital.
And senior leaders, if you are listening, listen to that piece of advice, because you brought back a memory of when we have to put together, and this is back when I was a manager, when we had to put together action plans, depending on whether it was HCAP, NDNQI, whatever these survey scores were. They're like, the intention was do your action plan, get back to us, and let's move forward. And I'm like, why am I doing this by myself? Yeah. What action plan for what? Just because we're in a different department. And so collectively, a few of the managers years ago, we would just get together and be like, all right, this sounds great. But there was no meaning behind it because it was so individualized, and it shouldn't be. That should be a very collective decision, because I can't come up with creative ideas and solutions all by myself. It's the collaborative group together that comes up with these ideas. And I still see that happening today. Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure. I'm seeing more like now more than ever because of how everything is based online, so, which is amazing and efficient. And yet it really then drops the ball on the most important element of designing any action plan or project management plan, change management plan, whatever it is you're working on, which is the conversation. Just being able to speak out loud your thoughts builds like this whole other set of, neurons in the brain and pathways to be able to then think of something even better. So like when we talk, I have different thoughts than I would if I was just by myself. So there is such value just in speaking what's on your mind and having someone ask a reflecting question back, let alone doing the brainstorming. And so if we're just left on our own to think on our own, we can never really hit our highest potential. And that isn't being discussed as often as I'd like to see. And so when we talk about missing pieces of leadership, it's rebuilding in, I think, what some of the tools have taken away. And it's made us efficient. And yet at the same time, it's made us inefficient because we're not having those conversations and we're not achieving our fullest potential.
What other missing pieces do you think leadership could focus on if they're listening right now?
Yeah, I think it's, I touched on already with respect to understanding the reality at the front lines. And I think the piece that is missing is for senior leaders to really check in on the leaders themselves experience. Yes. And how do you do that in a way that's authentic and caring and not just a check mark in a box? So I've heard of a number of stories this year, which are heartbreaking to me, And the story I'll share is that one director at an organization on the East Coast, her VP did the check boxes of some of the best practices, which I thought was amazing. She's like, yes, we will do gratitude work and we will do some mindfulness and we do thank you cards or kindness cards. I said, oh yeah, that's like great. Check, 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 check. And she goes, no. She goes, you won't believe how they're utilized. And I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, they were used to target me and other performers she did not like. I said, well, how do you target and bully someone with like gratitude? Like that is just mind boggling to me. And this is a leader I've known for 15, 20 years. So, I mean, who this individual is, and I trust her opinion. And so she shared many examples where in leadership meetings, as they went around to do some gratitude work, what are you thankful for today? Whatever some of the leaders that were being targeted said, the VP would like say, well, no, you shouldn't be thankful for that. You should be thankful for this, and then start like kind of micromanaging their gratitude. It was just kind of mind blowing to me. Like, how is that possible? And so then things like kindness cards actually became weaponized in a lot of ways in this organization. And I would never have fathomed that could be possible. So when we talk about missing pieces in leadership at a senior leadership level, it is, as a senior leader, as you're using some of those best practice tools, it's doing that self-reflection in terms of how you are leading. So if you are concerned with your leader's performance, it's figuring out how you can be comfortable with addressing it head on, one-on-one, and not hiding behind tools and not like leaning on bullying or just really kind of micromanaging. And that happens because you're not comfortable with addressing it one-on-one, or you feel threatened by that leader, or you're threatened by the conversation. And so senior leaders being aware as to when they're not showing up in terms of being their most leaderful self, and they're leading through paces of insecurity and fear. And you can only do that through journaling, self-reflection, getting a coach, making sure you're in an ideal state to lead with self-care practices, and then being really brave and asking your leadership team if you're exhibiting those behaviors or how they perceive you to show up. And that in itself, to ask that question, needs a trusting environment. So you need a leader to be self-aware first, and then to really be thoughtful and reflectful about their own method and practice to show up. So I think that piece is challenging because senior leaders may not even know they need that work. I'm sure this VP that I share in the story had no clue that she was being perceived that way, or if she was being perceived that way because she intended that anyone that she'd even recognize that was a problem. So where's her CEO, and then where's the board, and how do you do 360s, and how are you developing those leaders? Those are all kind of the missing pieces that start at the very top.
Yeah, absolutely. And my gosh, what a way to create a culture you don't want.
Using best practice tools. Oh my goodness.
Right. And it's so funny if for those that are listening, this is it's like the circle of life, it's how you start one way is going to impact how that circle just keeps going, and how you shift that change can ultimately create a huge difference. And look, I'm excited for the course that you're teaching. You are going to turn leadership into a whole new level in years to come. And I'm excited for that. Looking over the comments, Brett made a comment saying weaponizing gratitude. Wow, that's scary. That really is scary.
That is, Brett. I blown away. I couldn't believe it. So I was shocked, and I don't know how pervasive of an issue that is. And certainly in this one organization, it was a real issue for them.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your book.
Yes.
Transformational Leadership for Senior Leaders.
Yeah. So I wrote it. It'll be in bookstores April of next year. It is available on Amazon right now. And it's been endorsed by a number of people. Marianne Williamson, who's written, I think, 13 books. 4 or 5 have been New York Times bestsellers. And she was a Democratic presidential candidate when last year. She stepped down this year. So I was grateful for her endorsement, and I just did a wonderful interview with her last week. And the intention of it is to really bring into that humanist element into leadership, and really connect the dots for senior leaders that the work that they are there to do is to be connected to frontline employees, and that it isn't more work to do that. It is the work. And when you lead through the place of empathy and authenticity with the desire to see the impact your decisions have on the front line and their reality, things look so much different as a result of choosing that path of leadership than just the path of being busy and being in meetings all day without connection to really your purpose as a leader. And so I wrote that just, for me, it was a place of, I had no choice but to write it. I hadn't intended to write a leadership book. It was going to be on something altogether different, not related to leadership. And as I submitted my proposal, I just started writing about leadership, and it was effortless, and it just kind of poured out of me because it's been my experience for years. And I see some of the suffering that can occur when leaders don't lead through that place of being in service and truly caring about the impact of your decisions and the environment of employees. And to me, that is the missing piece. So I really wanted to kind of hone in on that message. But most importantly, I just want to be in support to senior leaders because I've been in their shoes. I have lost my way. And I share in the book, a story where sometimes I would feel I've lost my joy in leadership, where, I would work 70 plus hours a week. And most times I'm excited to do that. But there were periods where I felt just de-energized, unmotivated, feeling a little bit negative, which isn't my natural approach to leadership. And then I would kind of reflect on like, what's going on? Like, why am I not like feeling energized to, start the day or what have you? And I realized I hadn't been shadowing employees. I hadn't walked in my employees' shoes in a few months. I had rescheduled it for whatever crisis was occurring at the moment. So that I would get promptly scheduled, a shift on midnights in the emergency room, and doing that realigns you with your purpose, and you can't walk away from shadowing your employees for a shift on the weekend at midnight and not like be just in complete gratitude for the work that they're doing. So anything that you were kind of unsure of before in terms of your priorities, or whatever noise was in your head in terms of all the work that needs to be done, you come away from that shift, your job is to support those frontline employees to do their best work, because what they're doing is such important work, and you're in gratitude and awe, and then you come away inspired. So that was a huge message I wanted to be able to convey to senior leaders, because we all lose our way. It's part of our journey. Definitely. Figure out why you went into leadership in the first place, what's important to you, and then reconnect with that as best as you can in the way that makes sense for you is one of the other important elements of the book.
That's awesome. I love it. So it's coming out in April?
Yeah, it'll be in bookstores in April, and it's available on Amazon right now. If you just go on my website or on LinkedIn profile, there'll be a link there as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll make sure we get that out to the group as well. Raul actually is chiming in with a question, and his question is, what question should leaders ask themselves?
That's a really good question. So I would start off with, what are you grateful for today? What went well today? And what are you thankful? So before you ask yourself any other deeper questions, start off with that, and start your reflection through a place of positivity and acknowledgement of all the things that are working well. And then after you do that, depending on where you're at with your leadership journey, it is then, where do you feel like you didn't show up to be the ideal leader that you want to be? So where is that gap for you? If you know where your ideal leadership role looks like, or you vision that, if you've not, I recommend doing that, but you know how you want to lead ideally, then reflect on where you didn't show up in terms of that ideal leadership self that you envision yourself to be, and then understand the why behind that. So if you envision yourself to be a present, authentic leader, to listen, have the patience, not to judge, you have that as your vision as an ideal leader for yourself, and you reflect on the day, what went well, but then you think of, where did I not hit that mark? Don't judge yourself for it. It is just an acknowledgement that you didn't hit the mark. Don't beat yourself up for it, but then understand the why behind it. Did you not get a good night's sleep, the night before? What's your fitness routine been? Have you been mindful or do your mindfulness practices? What was the trigger for, those, interactions that you had that you didn't achieve your own mark? And try to unpack it without judgment, and then make the tweaks needed to course correct. And of course, every time you do that, it'll be a different circumstance, but you'll start to learn about your patterns and why you show up the way you do. And for myself, I had a really bad habit. When I was in the thick of senior leadership journey in Canada, there's something called Tim Hortons, which is like the coffee mecca in Canada. And so I would hit a Tim Hortons on the way in for an early 7:00 physician leadership meeting. And I would get myself a large cinnamon bun with white icing on it. So I do that with like a green tea or coffee. So yes, I understand where I went wrong, but at the time I was just so tired and maybe depleted, just whatever I needed to kind of get through the day. And so I would show up to my meeting after having had that. And then I noticed probably by my second or third time doing it, I was just a little bit too quick to snap or judge or be defensive with physicians in the room. That is not who I am as my normal or ideal state. And I remember there was a physician leader who I have great respect for. And he was, I don't know, he was complaining about something, or I don't remember what it was. But I remember like not snapping, but in my way, being a little less leaderful in my response than I would have liked to. And then I reflected on that. I'm not sure how many people would have noticed it, but I noticed it upon my self-reflection. And I'm like, gosh, why was I like that? That's not how I would like to have handled it. And then I realized it was that sugar hit, on an empty stomach at that meeting. I cut that out after that. And then I was different in those meetings going forward. So it's really essential to kind of understand where you're not hitting the mark for yourself. Don't judge yourself, and understand what those triggers are, and then make those improvements.
Love it.
The cinnamon bun was awesome, though. I do miss that. I'm very thoughtful as to when I do consume, sugar and carbs.
Yeah, you know what? You're so funny because I am so sensitive to caffeine, and my staff used to say, and I don't drink coffee, but I would go to Starbucks because that was always my thing, and I would get a chai latte. And if I drank that on an empty stomach and I was going into the unit and I'm like talking to staff and doing stuff, and literally they would say, Noelle, did you have a chai latte this morning?
Yeah, exactly.
Because my approach was so different and it was so impulsive. And I was like very much like up to here, and they could clearly tell the difference. So
you wouldn't think, right? So it's important that it's those small decisions, and we don't understand that as leaders unless we really do that self-reflection. But it is being as conscious of understanding the food you eat before you lead and before you show up as a leader. Like you have to. And I learned over time, before board meetings at night, I couldn't do a green tea because I would be just my speech would be a little bit too hurried, or I would be a little more wanting to cut people off and jump in, as opposed to being patient and letting people say what's so for themselves. As simple as a green tea at 4 p.m. And so you have to really, as a leader, be self-aware as the impact your environment has on how you show up as a leader to be the best leader you want to be.
Absolutely. And you have to be purposeful too. There has to be purpose in what you're doing. And, just looking over at the comments, Rala said that Jody, his wife, loves Tim Hortons coffee, and he absolutely loves the cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're awesome.
As long as he doesn't add a Diet Coke to that cinnamon roll, I will be okay with that.
That's some Red Bull. You're gonna be good for the day.
That's so funny. And then Joanna said, after BB's last show with Rawlis, I've stopped to drink coffee. I had a later one on Monday, and my anxiety was through the roof. I'm glad I know that coffee is not my friend. And it's so true. And that's part of exactly everything you've talked about this past hour. It's all self-reflection, because if you're feeling it and you're seeing it, the people in front of you are as well. And you're not fooling anybody. So don't fool yourself and do that self-reflection, because you know how you're acting, you know how you feel in those moments. And if you don't address it, people are watching you and people are listening.
Yeah. And I think it's really around that non-judgment of yourself as you do that self-reflection. So it's being kind to yourself, and we are human. We're here to understand more about ourselves and provide that value and serve the purpose we're meant to serve in this world. And it's the journey. So yeah, like we're all gonna have mistakes and slip ups. It's part of life. And as you self-reflect, it's not beating yourself up about it. It is acknowledging the decision, understanding what circumstances created you to make the decisions you made, and then figure out how you can improve them. And you're going to improve them maybe tomorrow, and then you may have a step backwards, and that is okay. It's about the reflection and the continuous journey of improvement. As long as the trajectory is kind of going up and not down, then you're in good shape. And I work with clients all the time, senior leaders who really struggle, and I work with their teams. So I'm pretty purposeful in how I set up my engagement. I don't like just to coach the senior leader, because you only get one little view, their view of what's going on. And so you're not able to have as much impact or value unless you kind of work with some of the key leaders that they work with, not to evaluate the leaders, just work through some of the issues that they're working with. And as you work through issues, you kind of see how the interactions in a everyday format impact culture, impact how they're perceived as a leader. And I say to the leaders that report directly to the senior leader, as they're trying to change and improve on whatever it is they're focusing in on, and that behavior still is showing up, that it is a transition, and that they are acknowledging that they have a desire to change and to be a different leader. And that the fact that they're interested in it and getting support to do that is a wonderful sign, and that they are trying, and they're not going to be perfect, and that you have to help coach them too. And so I think where we get lost in the hierarchy is that leaders that report to a senior leader feel that they can't provide constructive feedback. And I think one of my most important roles and why I was successful as a senior leader is that I had no problem talking to my CEOs and providing them constructive feedback every day, all day. And if I didn't do that, then they would be blindly proceeding on this path that would not help them achieve their goals. And it's tricky to do that. And I had to build a relationship of trust with those CEOs. And once you are able to do that, it's incumbent of me as a leader to hold them accountable to the values they ascribe to live. And when you see that not being lived, how do I kind of turn a blind eye to that? That's then me being negligent in my leadership duties. So it's a tough conversation to have with leaders and to get them comfortable in that space. And you have to kind of work with them as a collective. And it's one of the most essential part of a leadership role is to be able to challenge, if you challenge the process, as the Who's and Butters model will say, and you do that with the intention of love and an intention of constructive feedback to hit the goals that you hit, and you find a kind way to do it without judging, then you are providing the huge gift to those senior leaders in doing that. And I welcome that with my own direct reports all the time, and encourage those hard questions in meetings. And if you don't have hard questions in meetings, and you don't encourage your leaders to challenge the process, the one that you set, your own process, your leadership style, then you'll miss the mark on being the best organization you can be.
Absolutely. Rallis, I need a round of applause for that. Where's my producer behind the scenes? I'm not as talented as Rallis, where I can manage 5 different things at one time and be able to host a show and do all that fun stuff.
You'll get there.
Right. I don't know if I want to get there though. Well, that's like a lot of work looking behind there. But what would be, I can't believe an hour's gone by already, but what would be some last thoughts that you'd want to share with the senior leadership group today that's watching?
Everyone to take time for that self-care. And I think that sounds like kind of leadership 101 or maybe even not. But if you don't take care of yourself as a leader, you will not be able to show up in the state that you want to lead ideally. And so it's really being sensitive around your sleep, your work-life balance, and what you feed yourself and what kind of exposure to sunlight, nature, and fitness you get. And that's challenging with COVID, and yet it's essential for you to lead, in the best that you can to provide that gift to your leaders and to your organization. You do have to take care of yourself. And we're 9 months into COVID, and all of our routines are off, including mine. And it's trying to fit in what you can and being purposeful about that. And then the more you can fit in a practice of gratitude and mindfulness and reflection, and those are hard things for senior leaders and all leaders to carve out time for. And I believe through my own experience, and there's research out there to support it, that if you spend 20 minutes a day doing those mindfulness practices of gratitude and journaling and self-reflection, your world will look completely different, in a week, a month, what have you. And then once you get in the habit of that practice yourself, it's really encouraging that with your own leadership team and really kind of setting that foundation of strength in your own purpose, in your own self. And then everything else can be layered on top of that. But start with the basics first, so everything else can be optimized as you lead in the future.
Awesome. Well, Shona, thank you so much for being on the show today. I love it. I hope everyone heard all those pearls of wisdom that she had to offer. I am not going to end this conversation going on in the comments about the coffee and using that as a pilot right now. Everyone wants to pilot strong coffee to see how they're going to act. Oh, it's funny.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Absolutely.
I'll get on a Zoom call after that one. But thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I appreciate you coming on. And we did put in the comments your book that is coming out, so everyone can see that as well. And then go to your LinkedIn page too.
Yeah,
so
thanks. Thank you, Noelle. And I'm encouraged too, in terms of the work you're doing with the development of your leadership program. It is so needed, and you're leading from the right place of the people side of leadership. And it is so needed if we're really going to retain nurse leaders or healthcare leaders in the future. The retention and burnout rate is significant, and they need all the support that they can get.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I look forward to it too, because it really, it stems with the leaders. And we have to start there first. So part of like a huge core of the program that'll be coming out in January is going to be addressing the leader. You have to get into the leader. You have to learn those 4 key dimensions and use that purposefully in every interaction that they go through. And it's a 13-week course. It's an hour per week. And as a director of nursing for many years, it's designed for directors, for nurse educators. So I understand. I know the schedules. I know how busy it is. It's specifically designed where this can meet their needs as well. And you can check out my program on my LinkedIn page as well. I did put a list to the program up today. So for those that are interested in seeing the program, there are a few seats left in the cohort that's going to start in January. Sign up now. I look forward to it. I've loved being a leader, and I've been very excited about the journey I've been on, but this is one key aspect that, very similar to your program, Shona, to just give back. It's so, leaders, nurses, they are the future, and we have got to get them to a place where they can lead, especially in an environment that we're both living, that we are all living in today. Times are not easy, and they have to learn how to be able to manage times now, but through their core self first.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And perhaps offline or in a future conversation, we can talk about the physician aspect of leadership as it relates to a nurse leader or to healthcare leaders. I think there's some interesting conversations because there's a huge impact on that within the leadership sphere in healthcare that I don't see a lot of folks having conversation about. So some food for thought for a future dialogue.
Yes, absolutely. That could be on the 2021 show next year. We might have a series going here.
I know. There's so much to dive into, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing, Noelle. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You as well. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. It might take a few minutes for it to log off. I'll see. Ralph says it lags a few minutes, but that was awesome. That was a great discussion.
Oh, it was, Noelle. It was my pleasure to have that. These are the conversations I enjoy, and you are a purposeful leader. You get it, and you want to help improve leadership overall. So those are just to me, the most amazing conversations to have.